Hello there, and welcome to this session, Solving Tactics on ChessTempo.com. This set is 1700 to 1800, which means that if you are, let's say, Lichess, chess.com, rated 1700 to 1800, this is definitely a video for you. But if you are, rated 2000 plus, or if you're rated 1200 minus, this video might not be so good for you, and try to look at some other videos on my channel. Without further ado, let's just get started. Of course, you should be pausing the video now. Is that a real mate threat? Queen h2, king here, rook check. Or do I have a mate threat? Queen check, king here. Queen check, king g6, forced. Or could I play h5, trying to run him out of checks? Threatening mate myself. So queen check, king here. Queen check is a repetition. Queen check, king here. Queen f7 check. Also a repetition. So queen check, king here, h5 check seems to be the big test. The queen exchange is a completely drawn endgame. And if I want to push on b7, I need to prove that this is not checkmate or perpetual. And I believe it's at least perpetual. Queen check, king here, rook check. If king h5, g6 mate. So I would need to play king f5, after which queen f2 wins the rook, so I probably need to play rook f4. Rook f4, king takes f4, queen f3 check, picks up the pawn, and that will I'll either let him perpetual or I'll let him draw in that position. So that can't be the objective here. Rook h8 check, there's nothing in it. Queen check, king here. Rook f6 check, the king would have to take. But pawn check, pawn takes, pawn check, that's nothing. Queen check, king here. Queen e6 check. I wonder if, queen check, king here, check, king takes. If the king doesn't take, then queen check will be very dangerous for him. So queen check, king here, check, king takes, and then I can return to d5, king g6. No. Rook check, king here, pawn check, king takes. Take on g, of course, but that does little to nothing. h5 first, h5, queen check, king here, rook check. Rook f, rook takes, king takes, or pawn takes. If pawn takes, queen check will be perpetual. So b7 allows the perpetual. Queen g7, I don't see how to follow it up. Rook f2 does nothing. Queen check, king here. Wait a second, what about queen check, king here, h5, and then queen f7 check? That could hold some promise. I was having a lot of difficulty finding other checks in the position. But after f7 check, maybe it's a different story. Queen check, king here. King here, h5 check, king takes h5, queen f7 check. King needs to go to g5. I could also play g4 check, but then king g6. So no, I think queen f7 check is correct. Then king g5, queen takes g7. And now I need to look at queen g6. I also need to look at queen g6 in the other line. If queen g6, there's queen f4 mate in both variations. Queen f4 check, king h5, pawn check, queen takes, queen check, mate. So queen check, h5 check, king, queen check, and now it goes queen takes g7. Does it go queen takes g7? Queen takes g7, queen g6, and then I can play queen takes b2. If king g5, obviously there's queen g4 mate. So queen takes g7. And now there shouldn't be a checkmate in this position, but there is queen takes b2. Queen takes b2, queen h5 check, king g2. So the other move that I considered was queen e5 check in that position. And yeah, I think that's correct. Queen e5 check. The queen needs to give herself up. And then I can take it and give mate. Paul Keres playing white. Paul Keres. I'm not certain how to pronounce his name. Maybe it's Keres. b7. Yeah, so the problem with any quiet move in this position is that it allows perpetual. Let's return to the original position. So after any quiet move in this position, for example b7, there's queen check, king here, rook check. Now if king h5, g6 is mate. If king goes to the c file, queen check will win the rook, or the f file here. I'm sorry. So after king g4, oh, this is the computer line. Whatever. So after king here, I would have played rook b4 check. The rook must go back. And here I thought rook takes check, king takes, and queen check. But I forgot that the pawn's on b7 now and no longer on b6, so that actually doesn't win. This is the computer line, which does eventually win the rook, it looks like, but then loses it back. Interesting. Another mistake people make in this position is to play queen f7 check instead of h5 check. Let's go to the line. Queen here, king here, and people will play queen f7 check instead of h5. The problem with this is that king h7 is just a repetition. So you just have to play this all over again. And that's why the computer doesn't like this line. Obviously not here, because this is checkmate. Let's do another one. It looks like queen g1 check leads to mate. Queen g1 check, rook takes, pawn check, pawn queens check, king takes, rook check, king here, rook check, king g3. Queen check, king takes, queen check, rook takes, pawn takes, king takes. I can't play knight f3 because of queen g7 mate. That kind of blows. That is frustrating. Wait. Okay. Alright, found it. Queen check, rook takes, pawn, queens, kings. Rook check here. If king h1, rook check is mates. If rook g4, I'll take on g4. So the best try is king h3. So the line goes queen check, rook takes, queens, king takes, rook g5. Oh, the king doesn't act. Okay, so the king is forced actually to g1. For some reason, I was thinking he was on g2. So queen check, pawn, queens, promote to queen, rook check, and then rook f1 mate. Mistakes made here. Knight f3. Yeah, so knight f3 is a good move. It would be a good move in any other position. Because after knight f3, if rook takes, queen is mates. And you're threatening queen takes, rook takes, pawn, queens, mates. However, knight f3 fails to the golden rule of quiet moves. And the golden rule of quiet moves is make certain that you're not getting fucked in return. And that's exactly what that is. That is, if you look up in the dictionary, what is it like to get fucked after a quiet move? Knight f3, queen g7 mate is going to be the definition. You'll also probably find my name somewhere in there, I expect. Okay, rook takes, and the knight's going to run away, right? So then knight d7. So what about pawn takes, rook takes b2, c6, or pawn takes, rook takes b2, rook takes d5. Doesn't seem very persuasive. Seems rather stupid, in fact. The problem with the position is that we are a piece down. So rook takes here, and I think I need to prove that this is mate somehow. Rook takes, and if he moves the knight away, like knight d7, I need to demonstrate that I can win that somehow. Or just do bad things to him in general. I mean, there's an argument to be made that you can do simplification into a one position. Since these A and B pawns are just really strong. Pawn takes, rook takes d5. Pawn check, king g2. Or I'm sorry, rook check, king g2, pawn check, king g3. There we go. So he's all out of checks. Now he needs to stop the A pawns and the C pawns. Alright, so first let's say he goes after the A pawn. I'm going to push c6. He plays rook c3. I play a6. Rook takes c6, a7. If rook a6, rook d8, queens. If rook c8, rook b5, queens. Alright, so that's the line where the rook takes on b3. What about the line where the knight saves itself? Pawn takes, and let's say knight c7. Knight c7. If a6, knight takes a6, so that's no good. What about pawn takes knight c7, a3, threatening c6, check, winning the rook. The king needs to go to e8. And then I'm not sure what to do. If rook takes here, then I can go to a4, then I can go to a6. Although if a6, b5 seems strong. This is a really complicated. I feel kind of. I mean, there's a very simplistic way of looking at this. If I take here, I don't lose this pawn. If I take here, or rather, if I take here, I lose this pawn. If I take here, I don't lose this pawn. That's the simple way to look at it. In the line where the rook takes, I will I'll get my I will queen. So if rook takes b2, I'm going to queen. So if pawn takes here, rook takes here, rook takes here, I'm going to queen one of these pawns. This I'm very sure about. About. And in the line where the rook saves it, the knight saves itself, could I play rook d7, king e8, rook takes, a6? No, I couldn't. All right, this one I lose the pawn. This one I don't lose the pawn. But it's not the move. Rook takes d5, knight d7. If a6, b5. Knight c7, a6. If knight takes, pawn takes, rook takes, a7. Rook a2, rook check, wins the rook. I will promote and he has to give up the rook. Why in hell is that forced? How is rook takes b4 forced? Okay, bishop a3 doesn't work. Rook takes c5. Rook takes b2. a6. Rook a2. Rook c8 check, king e8, rook check, king d8, and I'm not promoting. It's a shame that bishop a3 doesn't work. What about a6 now? If knight takes a6, then I have bishop a3. a6 if rook a4, then I can take the knight for free. So a6, if the knight moves, I can take the rook. If the rook moves, I can take the knight. And a6 if rook takes a7. And the queen is unstoppable. So my idea was a6. If knight takes, I will have the rook here, which is the exchange. This is obviously the full piece, but that wasn't something that I saw. And I don't understand why you would take there. Why is taking, like, how the fuck am I supposed to know that taking there would be forced? Why would you take there if it's very frustrating. Knight d7. That one was a little bit too deep for me. And of course, I mean, this is not a 1700 problem. This is just people who don't calculate. I think I can take on d7. Queen takes d7. King takes d7. Rook takes f7 check. King e7. King e8. How can I follow that up? I could take on f8 first. Rook takes f8. King takes, or rook takes f7. King takes f7. Queen takes d7 check. What I'd like to do is I'd like to play like bishop d6 check, king takes, and then somehow give queen c5 mate. But that's obviously not working. Bishop check, king takes. Bishop check, king takes, rook check. king takes, bishop check, king takes, rook check, king e7, rook check, rook takes f7, king takes, queen check, king g6, rook check, king h5, and I'm out of steam. I'm out of steam. Feels like it's some combination of these ideas. What about bishop check, king takes, and then queen b8 check? King would go back to e7. So no. Man, you take one day off and you're just fucked. Bishop f6 check doesn't work. Rook takes f7 check. Can't make that work. What about this? Queen check, king takes, rook takes, king e8, rook b7. And now how does he stop rook c8 mate? Knight b6, knight c7. It's not actually that difficult. So that's not the answer. This seemed like a much more strong reply, and I didn't know what to do here. I wasn't gonna play bishop d6, that's for certain. In this position, I was gonna play rook g1. Whatever. Feeling a little bit frustrated. By a little bit frustrated, I mean frustrated. Check, 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 check. Check, king here, bishop check, king here. Giving me knight e7. Or I can play knight e7, giving me bishop here. But no, that doesn't work. So it has to be bishop here, giving me knight e7. Bishop check, or I'm sorry, rook check, king g8, rook check, king f8. Now there's bishop takes, rook e8, knight h2, rook check, perpetual. If bishop f1, I'm getting mated. Oh no, not perpetual, I'm getting mated. So right now, black is threatening rook check, king h2, rook h1 mates, rook check, king f, rook check. Also mates. So I could take a perpetual and just be happy. But I don't think I need to. Rook check, king g, rook check, king f. King f. Rook check, king g, rook check, king f. Rook check, king back to g, knight check is mates. So rook check, the king would need to go to e8, but then I can play rook e7 check. Yeah, okay, there it is. So rook check, king g, rook check, king f, rook check. If king g8, I'm sorry, rook check, king here, bishop check. The king must take, or I'm sorry, the rook must take. Now rook g, king f, rook f. If king g, then knight e7 is mates. If king e, knight check, king f, rook h8 is mates. Very nice. And the reason why no quiet moves work, there are no quiet moves that are possible in this position because of, I don't know, let's say you take first. Rook check. Oh, I guess, yeah, I guess now you do have king f2 because the f1 square is covered by the bishop. But if you go to h2, you're getting mated. So this quiet move does work. It's not necessarily a quiet move. But it doesn't give mate. It will eventually, but not just yet. I'm feeling frustrated, so that's going to be it for me. well done if you were able to follow along with all those problems. Um, but yeah, I'm just going to call this one to an end. I'm sorry.